any refugees? There might be some in your community. We'll talk about the refugees living in our country on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. The executive orders President Trump signed earlier this year, placing a 120-day ban on all refugees entering the United States, brought attention to some of the issues related to refugees living here. The presidential ban raised questions as to who should be admitted, when should they be admitted, from which countries they should be admitted, and how should they be screened. While much of the nation's attention was focused on refugees outside of our country, how much do we know about the millions of refugees who already live among us? Current data shows that approximately 3 million refugees were admitted to the U.S. since Congress passed the Refugee Act of 1980. My four guests on my show today will discuss some of the issues facing refugees who live in the United States. Seated to my far left is Angela Albright, who is the director of the Refugee Foster Care Division of Catholic Charities. Angela has worked as a licensed clinical social worker in Santa Clara County for 12 years. Abel Martinez is seated to my immediate left. Abel is the social work supervisor for Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County's Foster Refugee Care Program. He has worked with unaccompanied children through the program. Seated to my immediate right is Laura Chakarian. Laura has worked with the Catholic Charities Refugee Foster Care Team for over 4 years and previously worked in Los Angeles with refugees and survivors of state-sponsored torture. My fourth guest is Isaiah Sium. Isaiah is originally from Eritrea, a country in East Africa. He is the vice chairman of the Eritrean Community Center of Santa Clara County. He works as a software engineer at IBM, and he owns a janitorial company. Well, thank you so very much for being here. Laura, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Well, I read, in terms of doing some background reading, that the public in the U.S. has never really been behind the admittance, the entry of refugees in this country for decades. Would you have any ideas why that might be?
Well, I think that it goes beyond decades. I mean, if you look back at Italian Americans, Irish Americans, I think they started out as refugees, fleeing persecution from their countries. So we're talking in the the late 1700s, 1800s, that these things were already happening, and it was creating a lot of turmoil for the people that were here already. But as we know, Italian Americans and Irish Americans are citizens, and nobody questions that. I think what happens is that people get scared. People don't know these people coming, and it takes a while for them to sort of get used to it. But just like Italian Americans and Irish Americans, I believe that other refugees will also be accepted. We just have to be accepting of them.
Angela, would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree. I do think that fear is a big motivator in people's decision-making when it comes to refugees and accepting them and deciding if they want to welcome them into the country. And I think that we've seen over time that the stories that do come out about refugees sometimes can be sensationalized, and we hear just the negative things, and then that leads to fear and a misunderstanding. There's a lot of current misperceptions about refugees and what refugees bring to our culture and our community. And so I do think that if we got more information out there about refugees and about what they really do bring to the community, then I think that people would be less afraid. But I think it's just a lot of unknown.
Sure. Would the two of you agree?
I would. I think it is a fear of the other and a lack of familiarity. You may have grown up next to a neighbor that perhaps has a background as a refugee and might not be aware of it, and perhaps they're a close friend. And so really there's that sentiment, once you hear the label refugee, what that brings to mind in terms of perception. I think that's a piece.
Isaiah?
I think, well, thank you for the opportunity first, and glad to be with these colleagues from Catholic Charities. Glad to be with you guys. So welcoming the unknown is, I think, a big factor, that you really don't know who is coming. You don't know what they are bringing to where you are, to your community. And some people are also, they're afraid of their jobs might be taken. Their school systems, they don't know what will happen to their school systems once they bring someone from outside. So some part of it is, educating the public that who are these refugees, where are they coming, why are they coming?
Don't American school children, haven't they learned in their history class that what the Statue of Liberty stands for? Give me your poor, your tired, you're wretched from the earth all around.
Yeah.
So is it that we don't really live up to the principles on which this country was founded in terms of welcoming those from other countries?
The Statue of Liberty is a symbol of just freedom and bringing people to this country. But I think we live in a political climate right now where we're fed sort of a narrative that being a refugee, being from another country, speaking a different language is actually a bad thing, and they tie it to various other things that make it negative.
But you mentioned that this is something that's been here almost since the beginning. I guess not before this country was taken from the Native Americans, but just the idea that keep other people out. We're here now, we have our own, let everybody else stay away.
I think that sentiment, unfortunately, is held by a lot of people. But I also think there's a lot of people in the country that have that really do hold the sentiment that we should welcome others. And I think we see that mix and that clash. We see it in the current political climate. We see it with the families that welcome the refugee kids that we resettle. And so I think if even though that sometimes it does feel like we're missing the point, like we've forgotten that our families came here and were refugees at some point in time, even though we forget that, there are others that still remember and still have that welcoming spirit. And I think we see both within our communities and across the country.
Tell me, since you work with refugee children for the most part, right? Where do they come from primarily?
So we serve a number of youth that come from many different continents, whether it's Africa, Asia. I actually have a list of countries which I'll read because I haven't memorized them all. In terms of youth coming from Africa, we see youth from Sudan, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Central African Republic, Ghana, Ethiopia, Eritrea. We also have youth from Burma, Nepal, China, Vietnam, North Korea, India, and then the Latin American cohort of Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, as well as Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And so that's just a snapshot of some of the current youth that we have. We have about 130 children and young adults currently in our program, and so those are the countries that they're coming from.
Yes, how do they get in the program? And I think, I didn't hear Western Europe. Did I hear Western Europe?
No, you did not.
Ah, okay,
Yeah.
why?
Well, a lot of the kids that come to our program specifically are considered unaccompanied refugee minors. And so once they have refugee status, they also have to be given the separate status of being unaccompanied. So that means either maybe they're orphaned and they're alone, or it could be that when they fled the war or oppression or poverty that they were running from, it could be that their families were lost in that fleeing process, or that due to safety concerns they had to flee without their family. So for various reasons, they can be unaccompanied. And so once they have that status, they do get priority status for resettlement, because I think everyone understands that a kid should never be alone, right? And they try to help them find families. But so we see a lot of the unaccompanied kids coming from the areas that Laura mentioned versus, some of the countries.
And how do you get them? How do they get into the program?
Every nation that accepts refugees accepts a certain amount of refugees. The UNHCR and so
UNCR,
UNHCR,
which is
the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees.
oh, okay.
and then that goes to the Office of Refugee Resettlement here in the United States, and then they go through different voluntary agencies. One of them being the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, who then refers them to programs like ours.
So, do the children come in off the boat someplace? Do
Off
they?
a plane.
Off the plane.
We actually meet them at the airport. In fact, Laura mentioned earlier that we have a youth coming in tomorrow, arriving tomorrow around noon, and so our staff will meet the youth at the airport along with his new foster family, and they'll come off the plane with their little bag of all their belongings, and we meet them from there and take guardianship.
It's still something of a mystery to me.
Yeah, maybe I can add some
Yeah.
specific
Sure.
when it comes
Sure.
to Eritreans, for example. So we have close to 10 Eritreans that came in the recent 2-3 years. So they flee Eritrea at a young age, 10, 9, 10, 11.
By themselves.
By themselves, they go to Ethiopia. So these
What,
are
they run across the border?
across the border
By themselves.
by themselves or with their friends. Because of the political situation in Eritrea, so they escape from Eritrea to go to Ethiopia. Once they go to Ethiopia, they go to the camps in Ethiopia. So from there, they apply as minors. That's where Catholic Charities process them to
So
come
there's
here.
some documentation in the camps.
Oh, it takes years to get there.
Yes.
4 or 5 years at least.
For the 10-year-olds?
Yeah,
For
so
everyone.
when they leave 9, 10, they stay in the camp 4 or 5 years. By the time they get here, they are 15, 16.
That's very common. Our most common
Yeah.
ages for arrival are between 14 and 17, but it may have been that they were fleeing at the young age of 8 or 9. But the vetting process takes a really long time. Actually, that's something that I think right now in the current political climate, there's a lot of fear that terrorists are going to come in and they're just going to be let in through the refugee process, and it's a way they're sneaking into the country. But in actuality, it is incredibly difficult to be able to be resettled. Out of the 21 million refugees in the world right now, only 1% will ever get resettled. And we
Any
take
place in the world?
any
Or
place
just
in,
here?
any place in the world. And that vetting process takes years, lots of interviews, lots of background checks, safety checks.
So how does one, you mentioned a child coming in tomorrow. You mentioned that there were 10. So they're in the camps, they go through the documentation process. How are they chosen? Given how many children and people there might be in the camps.
Yeah, oftentimes they look at vulnerable conditions, youth who definitely don't have any family members, whether that be aunts or uncles or even older siblings that can take care of them. Some youth have mental health and medical conditions that are a top priority, and so they'll get bumped up the line for resettlement. That's just one of the factors that's involved.
Yeah, a lot of kids too who are at risk for exploitation as well also get chosen over other kids.
So somebody has to be there caring about them, listening to their stories. And when they are brought here, do they come through JFK International Airport in New York? Do they come through San Francisco? Where do they come in?
Often they do come to New York, and then they fly into San Jose, and we meet them there.
And what type of notice are you given that they're children coming in?
Well, we know when they're coming in because we have pre-accepted a youth. So before we bring a youth over, we identify a foster family for them. So we don't want to bring kids over to, again, not have anyone care for them or have a safe home for them. So we recruit, train, and certify foster families, and then we match them with kids that fit what their like the age range that they're allowed to have in their home based on the ages of other kids that are in the home. And so we match a youth, and then we can say, okay, we can.
Do you have a list of youth to choose from?
Yes, we have pipelines that we're able to view where we do the matching. And I wanted to go back to that point on foster families, because really we're not able to bring it over any of these youth without some of these wonderful foster families that we have. So that's something that we're always looking for, foster families and host homes, because it really allows us to help resettle some of these vulnerable children.
And how do you, how many foster families do you have, and how do you recruit?
Right now we have about 45 foster families.
Is this just in Santa Clara County?
Just in Santa Clara County. So we're the only agency in Northern California that works with unaccompanied refugee minors, and we're able to serve multiple counties around in the Bay Area. And so we have an outreach team, a really stellar outreach team that goes out to the community, and they do presentations at community centers, at religious organizations. We've done radio spots. We've had advertisements on BART. We try to get the word out however we can about the program in order to bring people in who are interested in opening their homes.
So
for these
right
kids.
now you have 45 homes that are available.
Well, they're not
They're-
available.
they
They're,
have
they're
kids.
being
matched
utilized.
already.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
right now we're at the 1-to-1 ratio where the homes have already been matched with youth, and so we're always looking for new families to come and join the fold. And some of these families are located as far north as Antioch and all the way down in Monterey. So we do serve the 7 surrounding counties and can certify families from different areas.
And how long are the young people expected to stay with the foster family?
Actually, California has some great foster care protection laws, and our youth can stay in foster care with their families until they're 21, and then actually they can stay in our program up to age 24. So we know that they come in with a lot of challenges to overcome. I mean, they've already overcome so much adversity to even get here, but once they're here, they have to acculturate, learn the language. We enroll them in school. There's so much to accomplish, and so the program allows us to actually stick by their side for a little while longer post foster care, so we can help them learn more independent living skills, go to college, become more successful community members.
So, Isaiah, you mentioned that in the camps a child might come in at 10 and may not be brought over as a refugee until they're 14, 15.
Yeah.
What happens to a 14 or 15-year-old? I mean, what grade are they placed in? Because we're right now talking about a high school student who would be a high school student here.
So that's some of the challenges that they face once they come here. So specifically for the Eritreans, once they are in the camp, there is actually a school that they can go to attend.
In the camp?
In the camp. But they see their older brother or someone that they know or someone from the Eritrean community. They see them with master's degree or bachelor's degree, but they are in the camp. They cannot do anything with that degree, with that education. So while they look at that, so education to them is almost nothing. So a lot of them skip school. They do not go to school in the camp, yeah, or they do not take it seriously. So by the time they get here, if they're 16, then they have to be in high school. But their education level is way lower than that. So that's where our community center works with Catholic Charities, try to bring them up to the speed so that they can attend the school and then be successful. So it's one of the challenges once they get here.
What type of, for lack of a better word, I'll say success rate?
Well, we think all of our kids are
100%
successful.
successful,
100%.
yeah.
I mean, given the challenges
Yes.
that they face.
It's absolutely amazing to me, the resiliency that these kids have. And when they get here, they're far, far behind in education, but they just have the need to succeed and really do well in education. I mean, we have kids at Davis. We had, what are some of the kids? Berkeley.
I think some of the other schools.
We have kids going to community college who started with very little education.
And they're living with their foster families still, or
Some of them are, some of them are
there
on their own.
residential homes, or?
We also work with what we call host families, which are families that are willing to open their home and rent a room to a refugee youth post foster care, but rent it at a much lower than market rate. And it gives the youth kind of a stepping stone into independence. So they're
Who
still
pays the rent?
We do. And well, actually, we give the youth a stipend, and then they have it arranged with the foster family to pay the rent. So it's part of practicing being an adult. They pay their own bills. You know, they're most of them are working. Well, they're working or going to school or a combination of both. And so it just gives another opportunity for them to see what a safe family home looks like, and if they have questions or still need help, there's that extra layer of support before they're fully out on their own.
How long has the program been in existence?
The URM program itself started in 1980 as a response to children in Southeast Asia that were left without parents and guardians. So that program...
That would have been during the Vietnam War, when we had stories of the boat people coming over.
That's correct. And our program specifically, I believe it's been, maybe I need some backup on the dates, but I want to say close to 10 years.
Yes, I believe so. And actually Catholic Charities has been resettling refugees in Santa Clara County for 38 years, because we also have a refugee resettlement program for adults and families along with our unaccompanied refugee minor program. So since, for the last 38 years, Catholic Charities has resettled 7,000 refugees in the Bay Area.
Who are still living here.
Well, I haven't kept tabs on all 7,000, but I do think a lot of them are still living here, yes, most of them.
What type of funding do you get to be able to sponsor the families, the young people?
So the Office of Refugee Resettlement funds our state, and then our state subcontracts with us. So we work really closely with our partners in the state for our budget and our funding, and we're really lucky, actually, and I'm very grateful that in California they do a great job of helping us take care of the youth. We have really great partners
Is it
at the
the
state
legislature that has to approve the money, or is it the health department?
The Department of Social Services?
Gets the money from the state?
Yes.
It's allocated, what, every year?
Every 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's allocated on a yearly basis, but we basically set 3 years of funding and contracts with them, and then each year it differentiates a little bit based on need.
What type of challenges have you seen? And I'm just thinking right now, the current administration's policies, has that given you cause for concern?
Well, as the ban has come in and out of effect, when it was first put into effect, the refugee travel ban, we were seeing youth who were about to turn 18 almost age out of the opportunity to have benefits and enter the program. So some of them were stopped from getting on their planes, leaving their country of origin. And it was really heartbreaking to hear these stories of youth that had a family waiting for them and were trying to come over. Fortunately, the 2 of our youth in our program that were stopped from getting on their plane flights eventually were able to come and arrive safely to San Jose and be matched with families. So that felt like a small victory, but it has caused some youth to age out and not be able to receive benefits. However, now the ban is currently not in effect, so we are receiving youth.
Yes.
So when you talk about youth aging out, what is it once they get 18?
Yeah, they actually have to be here, and we have to claim legal guardianship of them through the court system before their 18th birthday.
And if their 18th birthday comes, I mean, when the ban was in effect, you mentioned several youth, but were there others who were about to turn 18?
Yes, actually one of our, what we considered a great win, was we were able to bring a youth over and get guardianship of him 3 days before his 18th birthday. And it was right during the time when the first executive order was written, and we didn't know if he was going to be able to come, and one day less and he wouldn't have been able to make it. And we have a legal coordinator who worked really closely with the courts in our county to make sure that we'd submitted the documentation ahead of time. Everyone was on board to try to get this kid here, and everyone worked faster than normal systems work in order to make it happen.
And we had a foster family step up and say, you know what, we'd love to welcome him, just all the pieces aligned perfectly.
So what is it? It seems to be a disconnect with what you all are saying about the benefits of having the program and what the program like this means to youth, to families. And yet at the same time, we have people here headed by an administration that's very, very fearful, that wants to ban refugees. So,
you know, as we were sitting here talking, one of the things that I sort of recognize is that our foster parent, our list of foster parents has grown in the last 3 months. And this is just among the political climate that we have now, which tells me that even though you have this sort of narrative about refugees, you also have an alternate narrative that's going on about people who want to welcome refugees, people who want to help out, families who want to welcome kids into their homes and care for them. And it just struck me earlier when you were talking that we've actually gotten more foster parents in the last 3 months or so than we have before. We used to really struggle to get foster parents.
I am going to make an assumption. And you know what's said about assumptions. But it just occurred to me that the people most likely to be foster parents are former refugees themselves. No. No.
We see some of that, but to be a foster parent, you also have to follow a very stringent set of rules set by the state, right? And so there's a lot of stability. I think that current refugee families are still kind of getting their bearings and acculturating, and it's really difficult to then kind of meet all of the standards that to be certified as a foster home in California.
So let's talk about some of those standards. See the difficulty when you're making assumptions.
We do see a lot of willingness, though. We see a lot of willingness, and we see a lot of refugees want to step up and help. In fact, on our staff, on our team, we have 4 refugees that work with us, that are on staff, who have said, "I wanted to give back."
So let's step into another area of generalizations, and why should we? But who is it that's most likely, or is there any type of person who's most likely to volunteer as a foster family, to be a foster family? What characteristics, and where do they usually come from? What group?
We have a really diverse set of foster families, but the ones that we see as long-term successful are the ones that come in ready to commit to youth regardless of the challenges that are going to arise. I mean, these are teenagers coming in. We know that parenting a teenager is hard regardless. And then you add in history of trauma and the difficulties acculturating and language barriers, and it can be difficult. But these kids are incredibly resilient, and like Abel said, they come in ready to work, ready to learn. And so what we've seen as kind of the common core for our really successful foster families are those that are really willing to commit and to stay with them forever. We're working to build permanent relationships for them.
You talk about the young people being very, very resilient. And I would think coming from, if you have to escape over a border, like from Eritrea to Ethiopia, the things that you've seen and the trauma that you've gone through and the pain, and what about post-traumatic stress and all of the mental agonies? And you've worked with young people in Los Angeles who were victims of torture. And how does one overcome all of that?
I wouldn't say that they overcome it. I think that the resilience helps them to build the foundation on it, that they can go beyond the actual trauma and create a life, of course, with support and with support systems and with family and friends and mental health services, all of these things. But I think that, trauma, as we know about trauma, it's long-term, it stays with us, but it's what you do with it. And I think a lot of these kids, what they do with it is that they're able to sort of continue to build a life because it's better than where they came from. I mean, there's a misconception that they're coming here for opportunity when in actuality they're fleeing persecution. They're fleeing, potential death or trafficking to come here. So the alternative is to come here and to work with their trauma and to do better and have a better life.
So do we characterize the immigrants, undocumented immigrants from, let's say, Mexico and Latin, other parts of South and Central America as refugees? What's the distinction?
I think that's a challenging labeling piece, depending on their reason, their reason for leaving their country of origin. They might qualify to be asylees, which is a slightly different...
Asylees. Seeking asylum.
Seeking asylum. Yeah, I mean, so we have for Eritreans, for example, we have asylees that come to the U.S. through different ways. Once they come here, they cannot go back home because of the political situation back home, so they ask an asylum here. So once their asylum case is proven to be correct, then they get their case being granted. So then they start living, getting their paperwork ready.
How many cases or what percentage might get denied?
So for Eritreans, almost 99% gets approved because of the situation home. So there is no independent media, there is no constitution, there is no election. So because of all these reasons, if one goes back home, he or she will be arrested. So for that case, yeah.
I think someplace along the line I read that President Trump has denied the automatic asylum in some cases for, I think there were some refugees either from Liberia or from other countries that might have had Ebola outbreaks where there were automatic admittance.
I don't know.
Have there been any denials since January or any cutbacks other than the executive orders?
So I think for us, the executive order is the one that affected few Eritreans that came through Sudan, even though they're Eritreans, but since they came through Sudan, so they were denied here at the airport for a few days to make sure that they're not from Sudan.
So given those circumstances, would it make sense if people are ready to come into the country and there is a ban from a country like Sudan, they might be put on a plane and sent to another country where there is no such ban and allowed to come in?
So say it one more time.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't know if we've gotten that far, actually. It's already tough for them to arrange travel to the United States. And so what we did see was when the ban was in place, we just saw flights getting canceled.
Sure.
Or people that were already in flight then getting detained.
Okay, to clarify that question, because you might have a different answer. If someone is a refugee coming through Sudan, and since Sudan was one of those countries on the ban list, would it then make sense or would it then be possible to put that person, send them to another country that's not on the ban list and have them come in through that country?
Yes, you can do that, but at that time, you know, the executive order kind of, it didn't give anyone a chance. It just came.
But if that does happen,
yeah, you can do that. So
that would be a possible way to get around.
Yes, as long as they're not from those banned, from those countries that are banned.
But Sudan would be on their passport, right?
Yes. Well, on the passport, it would show that this person went through or passed through Sudan. So then that person has to make sure that he has to show that he's not from Sudan or from other countries.
Just passing through.
Yeah, just passing through was an issue.
Yes. Now, you had talked, Angela, you had mentioned the word misconceptions about refugees. What are some of the most common, or even those that aren't the most common misperceptions?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I do think that one, Abel kind of touched on that there's this misconception that refugees are people that are just seeking another opportunity, or they really want to come to the U.S. and it's just a new chance and it's a great path to get here. But in reality, this is just a last resort. This is their only option. They have fled for their lives, and when they go into a camp or they start the resettlement process, you know, it does take years, and then they have no idea if they are going to get resettled, and if they are, where that will be. And so I think that there's this misunderstanding that we're just letting people in who are going to take advantage of our systems, but really they're just looking for an opportunity to survive and to start again.
Okay, now, as you talked about that, I was thinking of the case of Syrian refugees who have been admitted into European countries and some of the problems that have developed. And there have been problems that have developed, right? So how do you address those problems and address those fears that people might have?
Well, I have some thoughts about that. I don't know. I feel like sometimes the problems have been shared maybe slightly inaccurately. And when I've studied a little bit about this issue, we finding that in the areas that they say violence is ensuing, it also in situations where there's very little, very few resources, a lot of poverty again, very few opportunities. And I think when you have any disenfranchised group people may rise up to try to fight for their own rights and their needs. And I think that that can sometimes be misunderstood as violence against another group of people. But you know, anytime we're forcing someone into a disenfranchised situation, I think it's only human to rise up and
So
to try
are
to
you
fight
saying
against
that some of the people in Europe, and this might not be a fair question, but you deal with refugees, these are some of the problems that refugees run into, or some of the problems that people think they run into. But if you look at the rise of nationalism in some of the European countries who have allowed in Syrian refugees and those from other communities, they are pointing to, I guess, cultural clashes. And so are you saying the people coming through have been disenfranchised? And
Sometimes. I just want to be cautious to say sometimes.
Abel.
Yeah, I think along with that nationalistic attitude comes the idea that that there is terrorism. Terrorism is used very loosely in countries that have a nationalistic sort of attitude. And they consider, like, if you get, you know, like Angela was saying, if you get a place and you overcrowd it with people, it doesn't matter what race, religion, or anything they are. If they're poor and disenfranchised, they're going to get angry. So when you shove people into a particular area from a refugee camp, it has nothing to do with terrorism or religion or anything like that. People become angry in those situations. But I think in some countries, when, you know, nationalist countries, when they look at those things, they sort of put it out to the people that it's terrorism. When in all actuality, even in the United States, you know, there's no real terrorist threat from refugees. It's all sort of perceived.
Ah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, millions and millions of refugees are going to different places, but the crimes that we see or the terrorism that we see that are committed by these refugees are almost none. Mm-hmm. It's mainly the homegrown are the ones that are doing a lot of the terrorism work.
Now, when you say homegrown, the refugees who come here will become homegrown, right?
Well, after a few generations, they can be homegrown. Somebody who was born here in the United States can be radicalized, and that person can commit a terrorist act. But also how these things are also reported on the media. Some of the things, you know, out of those millions of refugees or immigrants that are doing great, we don't see that much. But when one person does something bad or one person does harm the society, then because we have terrorists in every culture, in every race, they're everywhere, so they are not like attached to a religion or a specific area.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned, just sticking with that a little bit, I had guests on my show, my last show, who talked about the high percentages of immigrants from Southern Africa who were being deported. Now, have you run into that with, let's say, police profiling?
So police profiling with Black Lives Matter, I mean, we've seen that.
With the Eritrean community?
With the Eritrean community, so far, we are okay. And people who run into some kind of crimes, there are very few that have been deported. And some, the government of Eritrea does not accept deportees, so they are in jail here. But that's just very few.
Any police profiling?
Police profiling. Personally, luckily, I have not been experienced that myself. But some members have complained that, and in our community, we have called the Santa Clara Police Chief, City of Santa Clara Police Chief, to come and then explain to us what we should do when we are stopped by the police, and then we kind of try to educate him. Our culture, we don't see people eye to eye when we talk, because it's considered as disrespecting. So the officers, when we're not looking at their eyes, they might see that we are trying to hide something. But
So if a policeman is there, a police officer, or anyone else is there, if you're not looking at them eye to eye, where are you looking?
so you're looking down when we talk, because looking at somebody's eye is considered as disrespectful, being disrespectful to that person. While here, if I'm talking to you, you know, you have to make eye contact. So those kind of cultural differences, we're trying to educate the police chief so that he can also relay that message to his fellow officers.
Sure. And that brings up the question in looking at the challenges of the young people and the trauma that they might have gone through, and maybe some aspects of American culture that they run into. Has the cultural clashes brought about specific problems?
For most of our kids, no. We've had a couple of cases where we had a youth from the Middle East who some other kids sort of profiled him, and they pushed him down, and the cops came and they were very supportive of him. But yes, I think that they're, you know, they have to deal with these things on a regular basis, just as an African American or a Latino would in this country as well. But what we find is that they assimilate really well. You know, within a couple of months, they've got their iPods and they're listening to the music, and they're starting to talk, you know, the way that their friends talk. So we see a lot of that assimilation as well. And at least in a couple of cases, you know, we had a couple of kids where it was difficult for them to sort of maintain their cultural identity, you know, that they wanted to just immerse into the American culture.
And it makes me almost wonder, given the trauma that they might have experienced, if this might be a way of forgetting.
At least for one youth, I know that was part of the issue, is just to be able to put the past behind them.
That's one of the things we've been addressing with the youth, actually, because so many of them have come from countries where the police were corrupt and not on their side. We've really been trying to educate them that here the police are there to protect them. We actually brought some police officers to come speak to our youth so they could learn how to be empowered to contact or use the police if they're feeling in danger or fear. So we're trying to really empower them that here they have voice and choice, you know.
So I would think that's something that those in Latino communities here and African Americans might need to hear, how the police are on their side, the police are supportive.
Right. We did also, at this, within the same few teaching sessions, we also went over safety rules, how to handle yourself if you're pulled over, or what to do to make sure you're safe when talking to a police officer, because we wanted to kind of address both sides. We didn't want to give this false perception that there are no problems, but we didn't also want to create a culture of fear around our systems. And so we tried to really balance both and provide education around both of those topics.
What are the biggest challenges that you run into?
So I think some of the challenges that we've seen is cultural shock. When they come here, they've been at the refugee camp for so long, and they come here and then are set or put into an American family with American food that they have no clue what it is. So food has been a challenge, language, and then culture. These three has been a challenge for the youth.
Are they brought directly from the camps, or is there an immersion perhaps for a few weeks in another country on the way?
No, to the airport. Some of the camps are way far from the airport, so in order for them to get closer to the airport, they might spend a night or so at the hotel. So that's
and they're not flown to another country on the way. For example, if they're coming from Africa, are they coming directly to the States, or would the flight go to Germany or Paris first before coming here?
For us, it's an Ethiopian airline. Ethiopian airline, they have a direct flight to the U.S. So they can come directly to D.C. or Los Angeles or New York, and then they come here. So once they get here, especially they come out from those remote areas also, so that they're not familiar with technology, the American food, and then the culture. So it's, but that's for the first few months. But after that, the heavy lifting, the foster parents kind of pick up the heavy lifting, which I have a lot of admiration for them, and I encourage everyone to contact Catholic Charities or contact us, because it's just we giving another youth a second chance. So
So I am wondering also, but for people, our viewers are told how to contact you. Just in terms of families, I'm thinking the youth, do they have contact, perhaps,
It depends.
with the families or with the people who are in the camps or with any of their culture?
We really try to support any contact with family that are still alive or that are able to be contacted. We want the youth to stay connected to their families and their friends, and these youth are really smart and they pick up technology pretty quickly, and so they find ways to find each other on Facebook and to download apps to chat with each other or video chat, and so we really do try to support that. And whether sometimes we find family members that get resettled into the United States, and so then we support visits and try to let them reconnect. But the youth themselves are pretty good about keeping in touch with people that are able to be kept in touch with.
Sure. Now, Isaiah's talked about some of the challenges. What other challenges might there be, and how might they be overcome? What challenges in the work that you do?
Well, in addition to the acculturation piece, which I think Isaiah's mentioned, we do address some of the mental health challenges when youth come in. So I think we alluded to post-traumatic stress disorder a little bit earlier. We see some of our youth that are coming from war zones and areas of conflict where they've been exposed to a number of atrocities, and so they're symptomatic, where they may have insomnia, nightmares, a feeling of wanting to isolate from people or numbing. And so this is one aspect of the work that we do, in either pairing them with a mental health clinician if they're willing, or in working with their social worker. And it's just so amazing to see these youth come in, with the struggles that they have, and then over time, as the symptoms fade, and you can start to imagine what a challenge that is to come in and have some of these symptoms and start your junior year of high school, need to wake up every morning at 7 a.m. to get ready for school, and perhaps you're struggling the night before to sleep. And so that's where we've had some really strong collaboration with our foster families and supporting these youth to get the tools that they need to get better. So the mental health aspect, the acculturation piece is the other challenge.
So in some cases, I'm surprised that those who would have mental health concerns would not be denied entry.
Actually, it's one of the things that makes them a vulnerable population. They probably won't be able to get the same kind of treatment for their mental health concerns in any kind of camp to the extent that they could get it here. So it's one area that we actually recruit. We try to find foster families that are able, willing, and ready to accept youth that may have mental health challenges.
Well, I'm thinking some in this country might say, we want people here who are sturdy, who are strong, who are capable of surviving, to contribute to American society, and if they have problems already before they come in, they wouldn't be the ideal.
Well, we don't believe that the mental health challenges keep them from accomplishing any of those things. We see these kids who come in with, a lot of trauma, atrocity after atrocity, witnessing things that I can't even imagine witnessing, and yet they overcome so much, and we still see them accomplish what they want to accomplish, move on in life.
Yes, but you know what? Even soldiers in veterans hospitals have those post-traumatic stress syndromes. And they don't seem to be able to overcome them the way the kids are that you're talking about. So what would you say about that?
I think it might be these are young kids also that they can adapt quickly versus adults that, it takes a lot of time, energy to, to get back to.
Who've probably seen those same horrendous.
And it could be the services that are offered to war veterans as well. I mean, maybe it's inadequate mental health services for them. We know that kids are resilient. We know that some of the more difficult cases often become some of the most successful because there's such a long line. You look at Einstein. Einstein was a refugee, and in 8th grade he used to throw chairs around his class. His teacher kicked him out and said, you're going to be a nothing. And he did the theory of relativity. So, I think in adversity, it's like a lump of coal to a diamond, if you will. You know, from adversity, from pressure comes a thing of beauty.
Depending upon how people react to the pressure and the adversity, and each person reacts very differently.
Yeah.
But there are success stories. Is there a success story that each of you would like to leave us with?
So I can tell one. So one of the boys, he came here, he had a dream to be a movie maker, and he was able to pick up the camera, learn and taught himself with the great support from the community, support from Catholic Charities, from the parents. Now he becomes to produce his own movies. And he only been here less than 3 years.
So we can't see them yet on the big screen.
Not a big screen yet, but
YouTube.
On YouTube.
on YouTube. Yeah, he's got close to 1 million view on YouTube.
Oh, really?
With combination of few
tell
movies.
us how we can find him or see some of his movies.
Sure.
Is there a quick way of identifying him? Or?
Maybe if you guys can visit the Eritrean Community Center website, eritreancommunity.com. We'll put a link to his
okay,
YouTube.
and maybe I can put a link under the show description.
Sure.
Success story you'd like to share?
We were just talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was thinking of one youth who I worked with when I was a social worker who came in and had some pretty severe symptoms, and over time and support from a foster family and working with a counselor has just really made such great strides to the point where he was playing on his varsity soccer team in community college, was excelling in his classes, decided to join the Marines through the boot camp, and just has this heart to really give back and make a difference in his community.
Abel?
She took mine. No, I'm kidding. Each one of them is a success story to me. We have one youth who came from a difficult situation and came and just put his heart and mind into his study and his work, and he's currently in college, and he also works at Great America doing security. So every time I take my kids to Great America, I see him there, and I'm always like, I need to come up to this guy right here. So.
There's one of our youth who's actually been really open recently about sharing his story, and I think it's pretty incredible. When he was a young boy, his mother passed away from malnutrition in North Korea, and his father was living in another country, and he escaped to be with his father, but he was caught and sent to a prison war camp in North Korea, and watched, at the young age of 11, watched his friends dying and becoming injured, and decided, I don't want this to be my life, and he escaped again and swam across a river, and just miraculously was found, and now he's here, and he's studying to be a computer engineer.
How old is he?
He's 21, I believe.
Okay, now, let me ask you, there are those who would say all of these resources are being given for refugees in terms of foster families, in terms of mental health resources, medical resources. And there are those who will say, why aren't those very same resources given to the people who were born here, who might be homeless, who might be in need, who could be helped by all of the things that you're doing? What would you say?
Yeah, I think the funding that comes to us is actually a fraction of the actual funding that goes to domestic programs. I mean, domestic foster care is one of the largest sort of foster care systems are, and a lot of those kids get a lot of those same types of services, sometimes more. We've worked with kids where when they came, they weren't eligible for any services whatsoever, and our very creative social workers found ways to get services for them.
Okay.
So I think it's a perspective.
Angela?
Yeah, and I would say that we just take the perspective that we're one world. We are all humans and deserve help and when we need it. And so we absolutely are not trying to be in competition with any local programs, and we support all of them. I actually spent a lot of my career working in domestic foster care. And so, I have a heart for those kids the same way I have a heart for these kids. They're all kids, and they all deserve the chance to grow up and have opportunities. And so rather than looking at it as domestic kids versus refugee kids, we just kind of look at it as they're all youth. They all deserve this, and they all deserve the same chances and the same resources.
Sure, Isaiah.
So, I mean, if we support these refugees now, these are the refugees of tomorrow that will invent. If this country did not accept refugees, what would Silicon Valley be?
Absolutely.
So, you know, we're helping right now, but tomorrow these are the people that will help this country. Like myself, I got a lot of visa to come here in the U.S. Now that I am okay with my life, I'm giving back to the community. So, if we
Were you a refugee?
I was not a refugee. Yeah.
But you did manage to get a visa to come from Eritrea.
Yes.
Yes. So Laura, would you have any comments on that?
Just that it's not an either-or situation, that we can really support all programs and with creative funding solutions.
Sure, and in the 3 minutes that we have left, and I was just told it was 3 minutes, what would you like to leave our viewers with?
Oh, I would love to just say that if you have...
It's 2 minutes now.
2 minutes. If you have any interest in hosting a youth or becoming involved or finding a way to support these amazing refugee kids that will blow your minds with their resilience and their strengths and their humor and their personalities, please contact us. We have so many ways to get involved, and we're always looking for families. Like Laura mentioned earlier, we can't bring kids over unless we have families identified specifically for them.
And how would people contact you?
I can send you my email, and you can put that on the maybe on the
Or is
website.
there a website?
Oh yeah, Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. And you can also find us on Facebook and also on Twitter. So any of those, we're pretty easy to find. Even if you just Google refugee foster care in Santa Clara County, we'll come up.
Sure, and Abel, anything you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I would just like to say that when people, when the word refugee comes up for people, I want them to, instead of making assumptions or misconceptions about who they are, that they should study and really, really understand what a refugee is.
Ah, and that their families might have been one once upon a time.
Yes, Steve Jobs.
Laura?
Oh no, that I was just agreeing with Abel.
Okay, a few words. We probably have 30 seconds left.
I'll turn to Isaiah.
Oh, well, I think they've said it well. So let's just give these kids another opportunity to live, another opportunity to excel. So let's give our hands.
Give our hands.
Our hands to Catholic Charities when it comes to this URM, supporting the youth.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Isaiah.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll give our hands, we'll give our thoughts. I'd certainly like to thank you for
you.
giving
Thank
us
you.
more to think about. And I appreciate your being on the show. And I certainly appreciate our viewers for watching. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, it was a pleasure.